These are the inside stories of the Iraq War, told by the men and women living it.
The church will blow. We need to get out there. On March 20, 2003, the major invasion of Iraq by the United States and its allies began. The main reason given by the administration of U.S. President George W. Bush was that Saddam Hussein's government was hiding weapons of mass destruction. This included chemical, biological, and possibly nuclear weapons. Washington also said that Saddam needed to be removed because of his brutal leadership and alleged connections to international terrorism. But even before the soldiers entered Iraq, it was still unclear what would really happen after the government was overthrown. There had long been tension between Iraq and the United States. In 1991, Iraq was defeated in the Gulf War after it invaded Kuwait. After this, the United Nations imposed sanctions and strict weapons inspections in Iraq. The United States and Britain also established no-fly zones in the north and south of the country. This means that certain Iraqi military aircraft were prohibited from flying in those areas. When Iraqi air defenses fired at the patrolling aircraft, American and British forces would retaliate. So even though there wasn't a new major war yet, small skirmishes in the skies were already happening. The United States already had a military plan prepared in case a new war broke out. It was called O-Plan 1003, but the earlier version of this was for a larger force and a slower operation. This was not what U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld wanted. Rumsfeld believed that Iraq could be defeated using only a smaller but faster military force. Instead of immediately sending a large number of soldiers, he wanted to rely on modern aircraft, precision weapons, intelligence, special forces, and the rapid movement of ground troops. There were senior military officers who were concerned about the plan. For them, a small force might be enough to defeat the Iraqi army, but this might not be enough to control the entire country after the battle. The number of soldiers to be sent was repeatedly changed and reviewed. Because of this, a lot of time and effort from military planners went into organizing the deployment. Planning for the security, government, and order of Iraq once Saddam falls became limited. According to later reviews of the DPR, the coalition had enough forces to win the main battle, but it wasn't clear if this number of soldiers was enough to maintain peace afterward. The United States had another problem. At that time, its operations in Afghanistan were still ongoing after the September 11 attacks. America also needed to allocate soldiers, aircraft, intelligence teams, and money for that. This means not all of its military resources could be transferred to Iraq. At first, the United States planned to enter Iraq simultaneously from the north and the south, with the main force coming from Kuwait in the south. Meanwhile, large American units were supposed to pass through Turkey to attack the northern part of Iraq. But on March 1, 2003, the Parliament of Turkey did not allow American ground forces to use their territory. Because of this, the United States was forced to change its plan just a few weeks before the invasion began. In the new strategy, the largest coalition force would come from Kuwait. They also did not plan to stop and fight for a long time in every city in the south. Their main objective was to break through immediately, disrupt the Iraqi military's communications, and quickly reach Baghdad before Saddam's government could establish a proper defense. Speed and surprise were crucial here. While tanks and soldiers advanced on the ground, aircraft would attack the military headquarters, radar station, communication center, and other important targets. Special forces would also enter different parts of the country to gather intelligence, disrupt the Iraqi command, and prevent some units from helping in Baghdad. Each country in the coalition has different roles. The British forces were assigned to control the Fars Peninsula, an important area near the Persian Gulf. They also needed to surround and control Basra, the second largest city in Iraq. Australia provided aircraft, naval forces, and special forces. Poland also sent around 200 commandos. But the largest part of the force really came from the United States. Approximately 170,000 coalition troops were involved in the initial phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom. This was smaller than the force used by the coalition during the Gulf War in 1991. Even so, they had a huge technological advantage. The coalition had advanced aircraft, guided bombs, night vision equipment, modern tanks, satellite communication, and a faster military command system. But the American planners also had some wrong assumptions. They expected that many Iraqi civilians would welcome them as liberators. They also believed that Saddam might use chemical weapons when the coalition got close to Baghdad. That's why many soldiers carried protective suits, masks, and chemical detection equipment. But after the invasion, no active stockpiles of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, like those described before the war, were found. According to the final findings of the Iraq Survey Group, Iraq destroyed most of its prohibited weapons programs after the Gulf War. It was also not proven that Iraq had a large WMD stockpile ready in 2003. On Saddam Hussein's part, his reading of the situation was also incorrect. For many years, Iraq experienced airstrikes and intense pressure from the United States. Because of this, Saddam seemed to believe that there would only be limited bombings again. He was also hoping that the invasion could be prevented by cooperating with the United Nations weapons inspectors. He did not fully expect that Washington was already prepared to send a large ground force all the way to Baghdad. Saddam also trusted that his soldiers could fight, but many Iraqi military officers knew that America had a huge advantage in aircraft, weapons, training, and communication. They knew it would be difficult to stop the coalition in the vast and open desert of southern Iraq. If they were spotted by American aircraft, they could be attacked before they even got close to the enemy. Another big problem was Saddam's defensive setup. He didn't put all his strongest soldiers on the Kuwait border. He had more forces focused on other threats. To the east, Iran had long been Iraq's rival. In the north, the government was worried about Kurdish groups that had long been demanding greater autonomy. That's why the Iraqi military was spread out across different parts of the country. Even the Republican Guard, Saddam's best and most trusted force, was not concentrated into one strong defense. Saddam deliberately kept these units separated because he was also afraid they might be used in a coup against him. Because of this, only a few of his best soldiers were stationed near Kuwait when the invasion began. While the coalition was preparing for a rapid advance toward Baghdad, Iraq's defenses were scattered, poorly coordinated, and dependent on the orders of a leader who misunderstood the real plan coming his way. In the first days of the invasion, the coalition advanced quickly, but in the city of Nasiriyah, they saw that the whole war would not be easy. On March 23, 2003, a U.S. Army convoy got lost and entered an area controlled by Iraqi forces. The convoy was from the 507th Maintenance Company. The main job of this unit was to repair and support military vehicles. They were not meant to lead in heavy combat. There were 18 vehicles and 33 soldiers in the convoy. After taking a wrong turn, they ended up in Nasiriyah. There, they were attacked by Iraqi soldiers and armed fighters who were not wearing regular military uniforms. Some of their vehicles had weak protection. Many of the soldiers were also tired and lacked clear communication. 11 American soldiers died. 7 were captured, while others were wounded or temporarily separated from their unit. The ambush showed that even though the coalition was fast in the open desert, the situation became more dangerous when they entered a city. There were many buildings, narrow roads, bridges, and canals, and places where the enemy could hide. It's also not easy to tell who is an ordinary civilian and who is an armed fighter. This is exactly the kind of fighting the Fedayeen Saddam wanted. The Fedayeen Saddam is an armed group loyal to the government and the Ba'ath Party. They are not like the regular army, which has distinct uniforms and conventional military forces. They often use pickup trucks, small arms, rocket-propelled grenades, and quick attacks. They approach from different directions and then immediately leave or hide inside the city. Their goal is not always to defeat the coalition in a major battle. Their more practical plan is to slow it down, disrupt the supply lines, and increase the number of casualties. While searching for the missing soldiers, The U.S. Marines were ordered to secure the key bridges at night. They need the bridges because these are the routes across the Euphrates River and the nearby canal. If they don't secure them, the movement of forces heading north could be delayed, but the operation became chaotic. Some tanks had to leave to refuel. Some units lost clear communication. Some vehicles got stuck in the soft and muddy ground. As Company C advanced, they came under mortar fire, machine gun fire, rocket-propelled grenades, and gunfire from different positions. They reached the canal, but the proper coordination between the units was cut off. In the midst of the chaos, some vehicles retreated without clear orders. Some Marines were left behind with little support and were almost surrounded by the enemy. They called for help from the air. The A-10 attack aircraft arrived. The problem that happened was that the pilots did not immediately recognize that some of the vehicles below belonged to the U.S. Marines. Their own aircraft hit their position. According to official U.S. military accounts, some Marines were killed and wounded due to a combination of Iraqi fire and friendly fire. But for a long time, it has been difficult to determine the exact number of those who died directly as a result of the A-10 attack. Friendly fire happens when one's own forces are accidentally hit. This can happen due to wrong information, poor communication, poor visibility, or misidentification of the target. In Nasiriyah, many of these problems happened at the same time. The Marines also reached and secured the important route, but they paid a heavy price. 18 Marines died in the intense battle that day. The part of the road they passed through was called Ambush Alley because of the successive attacks they experienced there. It wasn't just Nasiriyah that caused problems for the coalition. On the night of March 23 until the early morning of March 24, the U.S. Army sent Apache attack helicopters against the Republican Guard. The Apache is like a heavily armed attack aircraft. It has missiles, rockets, and a cannon to destroy tanks and other ground targets. The American commanders had high confidence in the operation. They expected the helicopters to penetrate deep into Iraqi positions and destroy many vehicles. But the Iraqi defenders were prepared. As the Apaches flew at low altitude, they were fired upon with anti-aircraft weapons, machine guns, and even small arms from the ground. Each bullet didn't have to directly bring down the helicopter. Even just hitting the engine, rotor, fuel system, or navigation equipment could force it to retreat. Out of the 32 Apaches involved in the operation, almost all were hit or damaged. One helicopter crashed inside an Iraqi-controlled area, and its 2 pilots were captured. They caused only minimal damage to the target. This was a major warning for the coalition. This showed that even though many of Iraq's weapons were old, they could still be dangerous when used together and properly against low-flying aircraft. At the same time, a strong sandstorm hit southern Iraq. The surroundings almost turned orange. Visibility dropped, convoys slowed down, and it became harder for aircraft to fly. Fine sand clung to machines, weapons, vehicles, and communication equipment. Soldiers also had trouble seeing even just a few meters ahead. Because of the sandstorm, the ambush in Nasiriyah, and the failure of the Apache raid, questions spread about whether the invasion was starting to slow down. But overall, the main coalition force continued to advance. In the early days, their bigger problem was the length of the supply line, rather than the regular Iraqi army. Food, water, ammunition, fuel, spare parts, and medical supplies all had to be continuously brought in from Kuwait. As the soldiers moved farther from the border, the route they needed to guard became even longer. Iraqi irregular fighters took advantage of this weakness. Instead of facing the main tank formations, they attacked the weaker convoys, maintenance units, and supply vehicles at the rear. Even before these clashes happened, the coalition had already tried to immediately take control of key locations in the south. The American and British forces took the Al-Faw Peninsula, the southern oil facilities, and the port of Qasr. Qasr is important because it is the only major port in Iraq that is directly connected to the Persian Gulf. Once the port is secure, it can be used for the entry of humanitarian supplies and additional equipment. The Rumaila oil fields are also important. The coalition does not want a repeat of what happened during the Gulf War when Iraqi forces set fire to many oil wells in Kuwait. so they quickly went to the oil facilities to prevent possible widespread destruction. In the north, coalition special forces cooperated with the Kurdish Peshmerga. In the west, they conducted raids and maneuvers to confuse the Iraqi command. The goal was to make it appear that there might be another large force coming in from the direction of Jordan. Before the invasion, U.S. intelligence also tried to persuade some Iraqi commanders to surrender or break away from Saddam. They used calls, emails, leaflets, and messages sent to military units. But this did not lead to widespread defections in the early days. Some surrendered, but many also stayed in their positions out of fear, government orders, or the belief that they could still fight. The Iraqi military was large in number, but that didn't mean everyone was ready to fight. Many of their tanks were old, broken, or lacking maintenance. Communication between units was also weak. There were skilled Iraqi officers, but they were not always in the highest positions. Under Saddam's government, loyalty to the Ba'ath Party was often more important than skill in military strategy. Because of this, many commanders were afraid to make their own decisions. They had to wait for orders from above even when the situation was changing rapidly. On March 17, 2003, President Bush gave Saddam and his sons 48 hours to leave Iraq. The Iraqi leadership refused. 2 days after this, the U.S. bombed a location at Dora Farm outside Baghdad. Based on intelligence at the time, they believed that Saddam and some senior officials might be there. He was not there. This was followed by more air attacks against leadership, command centers, communication systems, and military targets. On March 20, the main ground force finally crossed the border. They quickly entered southern Iraq, but the events in Nasiriyah and Karbala were the first clear signs that speed and advanced weapons were not enough to avoid all problems. There were enemies that were not easy to spot. There were cities where every street could be turned into a maze, and in the middle of a fast-paced operation, even a single wrong turn, a broken radio, or a wrong target could lead to a huge loss. As the coalition drew closer to Baghdad, another battle was happening on television. The Pentagon knew that public support was crucial. That's why more than 600 journalists were embedded directly with the American and British military. They were called embedded journalists. They joined the convoy and slept near the soldiers, and they witnessed the battle from the front lines. Because of this, they were able to quickly send real videos from the battlefield. But there was a trade-off. Because they relied on the military for food, transportation, information, and security, some questioned whether they could still remain neutral. They also saw the war from just one unit, so they didn't always see the whole situation. For the Pentagon, the program was a success. Instead of just press briefings, the TV networks received continuous video of tanks, soldiers, and battles straight from the front line. At the same time, the coalition used psychological operations against the Iraqi military. Millions of leaflets were dropped from the air. These stated not to fight, not to destroy the oil facilities, and not to follow orders that could put them in danger. Not everyone surrendered outright, but many changed their clothes, left their weapons, and just went home. Many ordinary Iraqi soldiers did not trust Saddam. They also knew it was hard to fight an enemy with a clear advantage in aircraft, tanks, communication, and precision weapons. After a brief pause in their advance, the main American force moved again toward Baghdad. The most important route was the Karbala Gap. It was a narrow route between Karbala and the large lake to its east. Once this was passed, Baghdad could be reached more easily from the south. Some Iraqi commanders knew that the main attack would pass through here, but the orders from the government were confusing. There were officials who kept sending exaggerated reports about the supposed attack and the coalition's defeat. Because of this, the Iraqi leadership was unclear about how close the American forces really were. Saddam still suspected that the real major assault might come from the west. His son Qusay was in charge of many military decisions. Orders were often sent through messengers instead of radio so that the coalition could not track their location. This was safer against electronic surveillance, but also slower. By the time the order reached a unit, the situation on the battlefield might have already changed. On April 2, 2003, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division reached an important bridge over the Euphrates River near Musaib. They needed to capture the bridge so that tanks and other vehicles could cross toward Baghdad. Iraqi engineers tried to blow it up. A part of it was damaged, but it was still passable. The American forces used a smokescreen to make it difficult for the Iraqi defenders to see them. They were also supported by Apache helicopters, Bradley fighting vehicles, and assault boats. The Iraqi artillery fire was intense, but it couldn't easily penetrate the thick armor of the Abrams tanks and Bradley vehicles. When the American armor crossed, the Iraqi defenders were defeated in close combat. The Iraqi forces even tried to use trucks loaded with explosives against the bridge, but these were spotted and destroyed before reaching their target. With the crossing now under coalition control, the main road to Baghdad was open. In the south, the British forces in Basra were more cautious. They did not immediately advance deep into the city center. They surrounded it first, gathered intelligence, and waited for the forces loyal to the government to weaken. The cautious approach was important because many of the residents in Basra are Shia Muslims who have long experienced oppression from Saddam's government. Eventually, the British forces were able to enter and take the city. In Baghdad, the Americans' initial plan was to slowly surround the capital. They would set up bases around the area and conduct successive raids before taking control of the entire city. But this changed after the commanders saw that Iraq's defenses were weak and disorganized. On April 4, American forces captured Baghdad International Airport. This was an important victory because they were now in the western part of the capital and had a secure place for supplies and additional troops. After this, the 3rd Infantry Division asked for permission to send tanks into Baghdad. This kind of attack was called Thunder Run. It was not an ordinary patrol. It was a rapid, forceful entry of tanks and armored vehicles into the city. The goal was to test the defenses, destroy enemy positions, and show that the coalition could now enter the capital. On April 5, the Americans conducted the first Thunder Run. 28 Abrams tanks and 14 Bradley vehicles passed through the main highway toward the airport. As they advanced, they were fired upon from buildings, vehicles, and the roadside. One Abrams was damaged and abandoned. Later, it was bombed by their own aircraft to prevent it from being captured by Iraqi forces. The Iraqi government used the video of the damaged tank as supposed proof that they had stopped the Americans, but the main armored columns still reached their destination. The first raid showed that there was still resistance in Baghdad, but it didn't have a proper central command. 2 days after this, the Americans carried out a much larger Thunder Run. Instead of just returning to the airport, the armored force turned toward the government district in the center of Baghdad. They quickly reached the area of the presidential palaces. The roads were wide and the surroundings were open, so it was easier for the tanks to spot and hit approaching Iraqi fighters. But staying there was a big risk. They needed to be supplied with fuel, food, and ammunition. The supply trucks were more vulnerable than the tanks and had to pass through the same highway that was constantly under attack. At the same time, the American infantry had to guard the important overpasses behind the armored column. If the Iraqi fighters captured these, they could cut off the escape route and trap the tanks in the center of Baghdad. The overpasses were attacked repeatedly. There were Iraqi soldiers, militia, and foreign fighters who approached in small groups and various vehicles. In some areas, the American defenders almost ran out of ammunition. The supply convoy was also hit. Some trucks were damaged and burned, but the remaining vehicles made it through and delivered the needed supplies to the center. Because of this, the American commanders decided not to retreat. The raid, which was supposed to be a temporary incursion, became a permanent foothold in central Baghdad. The Thunder Runs on April 5 and April 7 quickly broke down the organized defense of the capital. While the American armor was already in the government district, the Iraqi leadership no longer had clear control. Saddam kept moving from one safe house to another. Many officials disappeared, hid, or fled. The remaining units acted without a unified plan. However, the city was still not safe. There were civilians caught in the fighting. When the tanks entered the main roads while there was still normal traffic, some civilian vehicles ended up in the middle of the gunfire. On April 9, the U.S. Marines and some Iraqis pulled down the large statue of Saddam at Firdos Square. This was shown repeatedly on television. For many viewers, this became a symbol of the fall of his government. But the crowd was smaller than what was shown in many close-up shots. According to later analyses, the repeated coverage exaggerated the impression of a huge group at the Baghdad Red Cross. Those were the ones present. It's true that Saddam's government had fallen, but that doesn't mean Iraq's problems were over. The British forces captured Basra. Next, the Americans entered Tikrit, Saddam's hometown and main base of support. On May 1, 2003, President Bush spoke from the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. Behind him was a large banner that read, "Mission Accomplished." The banner was actually meant to celebrate the ship's completed deployment, but because of the place and timing of the speech, many saw it as a declaration that the entire war was over. That was not exactly what Bush said. He said that the major combat operations were over, but the coalition would remain to help with the transition from dictatorship to a new government. Within just a few weeks, Saddam lost power and the regular Iraqi military collapsed. But a quick victory on the battlefield did not amount to a real opportunity. The coalition captured Baghdad. The harder question now is how they will govern a country that suddenly lost its leader, military command, police control, and a functioning government. Saddam's government fell quickly, but after the fighting, a bigger problem emerged. The police disappeared, many government offices stopped operating, and widespread looting began in Baghdad and other cities. The contents of stores, offices, hospitals, museums, and government buildings were stolen. In many places, no one was stopping the thieves. There weren't enough coalition troops to guard the entire country. They also prioritized protecting military targets over ordinary buildings and homes. For many Iraqi civilians, the message was clear. The coalition could overthrow the former government, but it couldn't immediately maintain order. What happened at the military storage sites was even more dangerous. Many depots full of ammunition were left unguarded, explosives, rockets, and other weapons. According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, widespread looting occurred because of the large number of storage sites and the lack of security. Many of the weapons that went missing here eventually ended up with groups that fought against the coalition. The United States was also not prepared for the rapid collapse of the old system. There were plans to immediately hand over governance to Iraqi exiles who had been outside the country for a long time. But when they arrived in Iraq, American officials saw that their real support from ordinary people was limited. Meanwhile, many borders remained open. Foreign fighters were able to enter, while there were cities in the north and west with almost no coalition presence. On May 12, 2003, Paul Bremer was appointed to lead the Coalition Provisional Authority, or CPA. This was the interim government overseeing Iraq until new leadership was established. One of the first things the CPA did was widespread de-Ba'athification, removing members of the Ba'ath Party from high government positions. The goal was to erase the influence of the party that Saddam used to control the country, but there was a big problem. Under the previous system, many teachers, engineers, doctors, managers, and ordinary government workers had to join the Ba'ath Party to get a job or move up in position. So when the mass removal was implemented, it wasn't just Saddam's loyal followers who lost their jobs. It also included many people with experience in running the government. The next decision was even more serious. On May 23, the CPA issued Order Number 2. This dissolved the Iraqi army and several security and government organizations. Hundreds of thousands of former soldiers suddenly lost their jobs and salaries. Many of them had military training. They knew where the weapons were hidden, and some of them felt that they were treated as enemies, even though not all of them were loyal to Saddam. Instead of using them to help maintain security, they ended up outside the new system. Some quietly went home, but others joined armed groups, helped the insurgency, or sold their knowledge and weapons. This was one of the biggest mistakes in the first phase of the occupation. At the same time, public anger was growing. There were Iraqis who were initially happy with Saddam's removal, but this was quickly replaced by fear and doubt when they lost electricity, jobs, police protection, and basic services. In their view, they no longer saw it as liberation. It had become a foreign occupation. The tension was even higher in Sunni-majority areas that were once close to Saddam's power base. One of these places was Fallujah. The city wasn't heavily damaged during the initial invasion, but because coalition control was weak and the residents' anger was high, it quickly became a center of resistance. That's where the real problem started to become clear. The main battle against the regular Iraqi military was over, but there was still no stable new government, functioning police, or enough security forces. The old system collapsed before its replacement could be established. And in that gap, weapons, anger, fear, and groups ready to fight spread. The war that was thought to end with the fall of Baghdad only entered a longer and more chaotic phase.